So, Volume 9 of Sword Princess, I think what really stood out to me in this volume was Ayaz's backstory, because the non backstory based stuff was basically what was covered in season 2 of the anime and also covered in the light novels of the main story itself, which again, it takes a bit of a different perspective and kind of sees it from Ayaz's perspective, but to me, we kind of knew that stuff already, but the main highlight was Ayaz's backstory, and then I felt like the non-backstory stuff was just more of a way of explaining why they were going over the backstory rather than it just being its own side story where it just goes straight into a prequel of her story. What I really liked about it, as I said, was her backstory, because it goes into her mindset, how she overcomes certain hurdles, not just physically, but also mentally, and just the mistakes that she made as a character growing up and how she became a stronger and more, I would say, mature individual, even though there is still much room for improvement as a character. And I mean, everyone has room for improvement, but it shows where she's come from and how she's continuously still improving from that point onwards. And I really just absolutely loved the backstory that goes into it and the dilemma that not just with Ayaz, but also the other familiars as well, and then of course Loki as well. And Loki kind of just sort of, brushing it off as a little bit of fun and games, but at the same time still being very concerned about, of course, making sure that Ayaz in the younger form doesn't get herself into trouble, because definitely at the end of Volume 9 is when she gets into a massive confrontation, and that's where she gets her level up. I really loved the volume because it was the one time where we got to really see a much more in-depth mindset of Ayaz, because Ayaz has always been seen as very sort of, I would say, black and white. It's very one-dimensional sometimes how she can be foreseen, especially in the anime, but in the light novels she gets a lot more depth, and in this particular volume it goes into really what made her quite an emotional wreck, especially in a younger age where she was a lot more emotionally irrational, where she was throwing her life almost out the window, metaphorically speaking, because she was just going into the dungeon and not being careful and rational and thinking her actions through, and was just mindlessly trying to go through the dungeons and clear as much of it as possible, to the point where she's basically almost collapsing out of pure exhaustion. And as well is that because she doesn't have the necessary training and skills, she's just misusing her weapon and ended up doing more damage. And because she doesn't have to maintain it, all the skills that she needed to learn, she was just fixated on gaining power, but not the other things that will help her do her job better, like proper ways of maintaining weapons and postures and all that, to make sure that she doesn't misuse her equipment, not just her sword, but also the equipment on her as well. That's what I really loved. I loved the gradual steps, because she is a flawed character. That's what I like. Bell is not perfect either. He's gone through many different sort of growth spurts mentally and physically. Particularly physically, he's gone through massive amounts of growth, but mentally he's definitely gone through many hurdles. And Ayaz is a character that has made some very massive flawed steps as a young child, and has learned with those around her, those trying to support her the best they can. And as much as she does lash out at them in this volume, they're still there to try and help as best as possible. And even they themselves, particularly of course our little dwarf, our little prom, and the elf, they all go through their own little sort of growth spurts as well mentally, because Ayaz is sort of giving them that influence that's kind of making them think more maturely and how they're going to approach this different situation, and them learning new skills that I don't think they ever thought they would learn. It's what I absolutely loved about this volume. The only thing that I really didn't like is just, and I'll be completely honest, is at the end of it when they're doing the whole dance with Belle and Ayaz and all that, and Hestia keeps always getting in the way of everything, and it's just kind of like, Hestia, can you just let them have their moment? It's not like Belle's going to be stolen away from you for eternity. And again, Hestia knows that Belle has feelings for Ayaz, but Hestia is so fixated on blocking those two to the point where it almost comes off a little bit petty at times. And again, for a lot of anime watchers, they don't see the light novel side of things, because again, the anime doesn't fully add context to what is in the light novels. The light novels really give a lot more depth to Ayaz, and that's one of the downsides of why I've wanted a second season for Sword Princess. As much as I would like one, I don't know if we'll ever get one, because I really wanted to see Ayaz get more fleshed out time in the anime format, so people can understand the character that she is. Season 1 of the original anime did not do well because it more focused on it being almost like a different perspective of Belle's story. It was almost like a recap of the first season of the original rather than it being Aiza's perspective. But I feel like if they skipped over a couple of like the Belle parts and kind of really focused on Aiza's story, I feel like a second season of it would be really interesting if it just solely focused on her, because I really want anime fans to experience what makes Aiza an interesting and complex character, because the anime doesn't do a very good job at it. It mainly focuses on Belle and Hestia romance, which is not what the light novel does. The light novel very much builds on that Aiz/Belle romance. At the same time, Belle's always constantly adding new girls to the harem as well, so it's always that constant mix. It's just, in the anime, Hestia seems to be the really main focus, and I think it's just because Hestia sells really well from an anime perspective, so that's why they do it. I'm, again, not complaining that I dislike the anime. I love the anime, but you can definitely see there is a very different tone between the anime and the light novel, and that is something that you can see even in this particular volume, where you can see that, yeah, Hestia blocks things, and you can see that Belle and Aiz are coming together slowly, piece by piece, but in the anime it does it in a very different picture. But again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you like about this volume if you have read it, and would you love to see a second season of Sword Princess? Because as I mentioned, as much as there's not heaps of different things ongoing in this volume, mainly it focuses on, of course, the battle itself, where if you watch season 2, there's this big battle that happens at the front of the city, and an individual, a god himself, kidnaps Hestia as ransom, and that's where Belle and Aiz work together to go rescue her, and then they end up spending some time in a village. And I've mentioned that in a previous volume. I don't want to kind of harp on about the same things that I've talked about in a previous light novel review, and that's the only downside about these sort of parallel stories, is that there's a lot of stuff in each volume that crosses over, but at the same time you get a really unique different perspective as well. And that's what I like about this one in particular, because we get to see deep embedded into Aiza's history and where she came from. And I think, again, as much as Aiz is a flawed character as a child, she has made some massive leaps forward and grown as a character. And I just really enjoyed what this volume has to offer. And I really highly recommend it if you just want to know mostly about Aiza's sort of backstory, because I feel like this volume itself, if you just focus on her backstory, you get a lot of extra sort of major pieces to the puzzle, and how she's gained certain skills, how she got to her first level, and what drove her to get there. A little bit of the backstory. It doesn't go like right into like the evils themselves and all that kind of stuff, but it goes into her first major step in the Loki familiars itself. But again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. But if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more anime content, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.